Well, something's cropped up in my family life, and I've been told in no uncertain terms that if I don't go, I will be persona non grata. So when my niece says jump, I jump. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to go tomorrow. But I'm hoping I can see everybody before I go and interview, and I've really enjoyed seeing those of you who I've met so far. And these things are normally said at the end, but this is my chance, I'm going to say it now. I'd just like to say I really appreciate this opportunity, and I'm really grateful to Sensei for organising the Sangha and making it flourish the way it does. And I really appreciate the work that goes into setting up our Sesshin, because we've been coming for about 20 years now, I think, isn't it? And it's really slick, I think, now. You know, everything just comes together well, and then it's the way I see it, and Andy and John may say differently, but the way I see it, it looks very smooth. It looks very, very professional, the way it's all done, and you know, everybody plays key roles. You know, Jez has played a fantastic role for years, and we've got some great Tenzos. Everybody seems to really pull together at these events, and we all work for one another. And encourage one another in a way which I think is very special. And I think there's something, this is sort of leading into what I want to talk about, but there's something about coming to a place and using it in this way many, many times, you know, year after year, which starts to build up a kind of groundedness and a kind of rootedness within each of us that manifests and flowers when we come here and sit together. I think that there is something about well, John was talking about this morning. I think he's right. The space and the quality of the sound in here is particularly nice. But there's something about using a space and getting to know it really well, and really becoming close to it, that makes it easy to do the thing you've come to do, in our case, to sit. But the space itself encourages that. It's not, you know, we come and we use it, we're familiar with it, and that feels easy to us, and then we encourage one another. But I think the space does as well. And it's interesting, you know, that relationship between ourselves and our world. I think we overlook it a lot, and that's kind of what I wanted to get towards. I didn't really know what to talk about this week. I was floundering. And I wrote several things out and then tore them up and thought, no, I don't want to do that. And then Sensei was saying that there was a new digest piece which had come out just a couple of weeks ago, I think. And it was about inspiration for practice. And he encouraged me to look at that, and I did. It's really nice, you know, some lovely stuff in there. You know, I think Rachel was talking about drum and bass or something as something which had inspired her in her practice, and somebody was talking about a novel, and other things were talked about there. And you know, many things we encounter in our lives can really be something which inspires us to ask questions about what this is, about what our life is, what our relationship to one another is. And they don't have to be things which have that kind of Dharma label on them, or you know, a kind of religious label or anything like that. It can be all kinds of quite ordinary things can sometimes provoke us into really looking closely at our lives. And I was thinking about that in my own case, and I was asking myself, well, what is it that has been there for me a lot over the years? And as I thought about it, I thought, well, actually, in a strange sort of way, it's landscape. And that was very convenient to me, because I've been reading a lot of material in the last few years, which I think is rather unkindly called psychogeography. You might know what I'm talking about, but they're books where people are writing about natural history or writing about the world around them, but they're writing about it in a very reflective sort of way, in terms of what it says to them about themselves and their place in the world. I think the first time I ever came across it, it was in the context of something called deep ecology, which was trying to present the idea that we as living beings are part of the ecosystem. We can't see ourselves as apart from it, as separate from it, the way science does. Science tends to kind of break everything down and reduce the scientist to this disembodied, disconnected, objective viewer looking at the world. And a lot of natural sciences tend to feel like that when you read them, whereas deep ecology was trying to argue, well, we're part of this. The Gaia principle, I think, was part of that process. So that was the first time I came across it, but I found a lot more of it in recent years. Across the pond, people like Barry Lopez and Gary Schneider were writing about it years ago. But in this country, we've got a whole group of writers now working in this genre, and I think one of the most famous of them is probably the one you might have heard of, is Robert Macfarlane, who's written a number of, I think, really nice books about the way in which we fit into and move through landscape. And there are others, and he talks about somebody who was unknown in her own lifetime, who wrote an absolutely fantastic book, which if you haven't read, I wholeheartedly recommend it to you. It's by a woman called Nan Shepherd, and it's called The Living Mountain. And it's kind of Taoism meets Scottish Presbyterianism. It's just amazing. It's about her life in the Cairngorms and the experience of living in that landscape. And there's so much in that book. I can't possibly do justice to it this morning, but I'll maybe pick a little bit from it. There's so much there. So that kind of leads me to this question about the nature of our relationship to our world, our relationship to the world around us, as well as to one another, and what it means to think in terms of inner and outer. Very often when we talk about spiritual practices or meditation practices, or even religion, we tend to think of it in terms of something which is looking inward. And I think a lot of philosophy starts on that premise as well. You're looking inward, you're looking for the subject, you're trying to understand what this subject really is. And a question we can ask is, well, is that even a legitimate question? Why are we posing this difference between the subject and this so-called object out there? And what is that object? How do we even know what that object is? How do we even know what this subject is? Is this even a meaningful way to go about thinking about things? And yet it's structured into our language, and it's structured into the way in which we even begin our thinking about anything, that we seem to want to do that. So there's this issue of psychogeography. I think is quite interesting because it's throwing that question right at us. What are we that we could think that we are not the interdependency, the interconnection that we have intrinsically with one another and with our world around us? And Sensei asked this question yesterday. I think he said, do you feel that when you relate to one person, you have a different sense of who you are from when you relate to another? And for me, that's definitely true. The way I connect to one part of my life, my professional life, for example, feels quite different from the way I might connect to my domestic life. Which that throws up a question. So therefore, what am I? And why am I making these differences? That's another interesting question. What is the responsibility for my life I'm taking in one context, but I'm not taking in another, or vice versa? Why am I making these boundaries around who I am and what I'm doing? How does that happen? So it throws up questions about the way in which we compartmentalise and fragmentise the way we look at things. And once we start noticing those things, then we can question them and open up and find new ways of dealing with things, and maybe new solutions to problems that way. And I was asking myself, well, where in landscape did I kind of get my original curiosity? And I think it began with mountains, as best as I can remember. It was the first time I went up Snowdon, I was about 8, I think. And I just had this, I think maybe it's a fairly typical thing among 8-year-olds, I just had this determination, I was going to get to the top. So I was kind of racing ahead of my poor father, who was trying to bring up the rear with my little sister, and struggling up the hill, and I was galloping up this screep face to get to the top of this mountain, because it was just so exciting, you know. I mean, it was a real, I don't know if you've been up Snowdon, but it is a real mountain, you know. It's been glaciated, it's a pyramidal peak, and there's scree at the top. So it's, even though you get up there and there's a cafe and a train, and all these people come up on the train and they say, oh, what have you just done? You know? I mean, even though that is true, if you go up the old-fashioned way, it's a proper ascent. And I got really excited by that as a child, and thought, this is fantastic. This is really being alive. And then as I got a bit older, I kind of got into the more kind of romantic thing about the sublime and the ecstatic about mountains. And I remember, and this was the first time I realised that I think environment can affect the way we feel about ourselves. I went with a friend to climb Helvellyn, and I was about 17, I think. And it was typical Lake District weather, so the cloud was very low, probably around about 1,000 feet. It was raining, it was wet, it was cold, but we'd come all the way from Sheffield, so we were going to do it, damn it. And we set off up the hill, and we thought, well, we're going to do striding edge, because that's the proper way up this hill. And for those of you who are not familiar with these things, striding edge it's a knife edge ridge, which means it's sharp. Ishin knows about knife edge ridges now, don't you? Really well. You know, they're sharp. You've got rocks coming up to the pinnacle, and you're walking, when you get onto the edge, you're walking along the top of, well, it's a knife edge. I mean, that's what it's called, it's a knife edge, it's an erect. And it leads up to the summit. So we set off up the hill, and it was miserable. We were getting very wet and very cold, and you know, as I say, the cloud was low. And I just felt really gloomy. You know, you get that state when things are going badly, where you're thinking, oh, I've made a terrible mistake, what am I even doing here? I don't even know what I'm doing, and I don't know where I'm going. What's the point? I'm not enjoying it. And I certainly do, but I reckon most people do. You get more and more black once you get into that sort of state of mind. And we felt our way up onto the arete, and we were aware we'd moved off the grass onto rock. But we didn't really have much sense of what was going on. Neither of us had ever been up there before. So we didn't really know what this was about. But we were feeling our way across what felt like maybe a 2 metre width of rock, and then suddenly the wind picked up, and the cloud began to part. And it parted, and it parted, and it parted. And as it broke, we found ourselves standing on what felt like an island of rock in a sea of cloud. And we could see ahead of us the sun shining on the summit, and more cloud just pouring off the summit ridge down into the corridor on either side of us. And there was this narrow sort of trail, a bit indistinct, so still cloud across it, leading along the arete up towards the summit. And you know, we had this brilliant blue sky all of a sudden, and this massive expansiveness. And it was just like my whole world had just been torn inside out. And I went from feeling completely and utterly miserable and depressed to feeling utterly ecstatic. You know, it probably, I don't want to oversell it, but it probably was one of the most intense moments of my life, and it was without any drugs. It was absolutely fantastic. I thought, God, this is what mountaineering is. It's wonderful. And I'd never felt. I hadn't expected this. I'd never been above cloud before, because I hadn't even flown at that point. So I'd never expected that, but it was absolutely extraordinary. And there are a lot of, I think there are a lot of people who then sort of create mystical, visionary things out of this sort of stuff. And have you seen, there's a very famous picture by Caspar David Friedrich, The Wanderer in the Sea of Cloud, where he's looking down. It's that kind of thing. It starts to become this kind of visionary thing that becomes a motif for quest and spiritual adventure and self-discovery and all this sort of thing. And I found an example in the writings of W.H. Murray, who was a famous Scottish mountaineer. And I think this was in Mountaineering in Scotland. And it's saying the same sort of thing. It says, life is seen detachedly and in proper perspective from the mountain tops. Whoever climbs to a summit cairn will find that the joys and sorrows of his everyday life have been left deep below in the valleys. They have not ventured with him to the foot of his mountain. They have been shed off like a husk, and he, the new man, may survey as from afar his daily round of thoughts, errors, resolves and behaviour, with the inward calm of a critic inspecting a stranger. And it is wonderful what a different complexion is then put upon the affairs he thought of consequence. And I think this is often the way people can feel when they get on top of a high hill, particularly if they've had a bit of an adventure to get there. And of course, we're all very knowing. We've done a bit of Zen. We know what's coming next. So we sort of hear this and say, yeah, right, fine. But I think it's a real experience that landscape can give to us, and that can inspire us to want to do more of something, to want to find out more, to understand more about the way in which we work. I mean, the trap, of course, with it is we want to hang on to it. So, like, having had that experience in Striding Edge, I then spent the next 3 or 4 years trying to have the same experience again. And of course, guess what? You can't. And then the other side of this is, you can't stay there. It seems obvious, doesn't it? But you can't stay there. You've got to come down. So for all Murray's ecstasy at being on top of that mountain, for all the high I got out of being on top of Striding Edge, you have to come down. We had to go back down into the cloud again. We still got wet and cold, tired, went back to the car. So, these things don't last. So whatever we think they are, they're not it. We're going to have to leave them behind. So before I go any further with this, I wanted to ask you something. Sensei asked you yesterday what is practice. And I won't flip that around, but actually I'm asking you the same thing in a certain way, because in Soto Zen, we talk about practice as practice realization. The path is the goal. But I'd like to sort of throw this out. What is nirvana? If you had to explain to somebody what nirvana was, if you had to explain what it was that you were looking for in your practice, what would you say? What is it?
For me, it's when I'm happy in my own skin. When those times come, which not always, but when that happens.
Thank you.
I've stopped looking.
That confuses people though when they ask you why you do it.
Yeah. Confuses me sometimes. Yeah. I've stopped looking.
Yeah. Anybody else got any thoughts? I mean, I'm not necessarily asking what you believe nirvana is. I'm asking you, what if somebody asked you what it was, what do Buddhists mean by nirvana? What would you say?
I was going to say, I don't know, but that's part of it. Another part of it is a way. There's part of it is a way of being with myself where there's no second arrow, to use a cliche, and where I feel more connected. But I think for me, the not knowing is part of it, not having an idea of what it looks like. Exactly. Well, having an idea, but not much. Well.
I say, I've got a sense that somehow everything's bad. So I think if I could see for sure directly that everything, the whole of reality, was more wonderful than I could possibly have imagined, that's sort of leading to nirvana.
Mm-hmm. So something better.
Just so incredible that you know, it's just, you know, because like Jesus, the idea of Jesus, to find out that Jesus was really the Son of God, like that would just be like nothing compared to the actual truth, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That we are actually in the greatest possible truth we could possibly have. It's greater than any of us could possibly imagine.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. We're not living in some grim, you know.
Yeah.
So we create ideas of Jesus to try and make us feel better, you know. But it's actually you're completely blown away and liberated from you know, from everything. That don't, you know, that doesn't sound so good, but just more amazing than any of us could imagine, you know. And that's the actual
so it's
truth.
more amazing than any of us could imagine. Blown away.
And that's our final. That's where it ends, you know.
Yeah.
And even to say where it ends doesn't sound right. That doesn't
No,
sound.
that's good. That's thankful. Yeah. Anybody else got anything you want to throw into the mix? Oh, Giles. Sorry, I can't see you.
Some sense that everything is all right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's calm, peaceful, workable.
Yeah, a bit like Paul was saying, in that if sort of a more ordinary sense is that things might be bad or things wrong or lots of problems, some kind of realisation that fundamentally everything is whole and okay and all right. That's kind of what it is for me.
Maybe when one experiences the most mundane and ordinary as incandescent.
Incandescent.
I think being able to accept, embrace my own life as being enough, although I'm not certain that that's actually fully possible, but that's what I say at the moment.
So there's a sort of, if I can paraphrase, that's really helpful, thank you. There's a sort of way you can paraphrase this, which on the one hand we're talking about something being liberating and expansive and transformative. On the other hand, it's freeing of limitations, it's making limitations workable and making the everyday manageable. So it's bringing together two things, one about really appreciating the everyday, but on the other hand being really free and expansive. And of course a lot of the time we don't necessarily feel the everyday necessarily free and expansive. So where am I going with this? So I was thinking about landscape, and I was thinking about how I might sort of look at this subject. And I found this quote from Dogen Zenji in the Shobogenzo Hotsu Mujoshin, which means the establishment of the will to the supreme. So he's talking here about the aspiration to attainment. So bringing together practice and realization in something we're doing, bringing together our ideas of what realization might be with what we actually do in our lives, and how we bring all that together. And he said the founding ancestor in the Western Kingdom says, snowy mountains are like great nirvana. And the founding ancestor is Shakyamuni Buddha. So Shakyamuni Buddha in the Western Kingdom in India says, snowy mountains are like great nirvana. And we often associate Buddhism with the plains of northern India, you know, the Ganges Delta where the Buddha is supposed to have wandered around teaching. But if you think about it, the Himalaya would have been in the background the whole time. And he was born in Kapilavastu, which is right in the foothills of Nepal. So, you know, he would have seen the mountains there around him. And he's saying the snowy mountains, if this is a real quote from the Buddha anyway, saying this is the snowy mountains are like great nirvana. And Dogen says about that, remember, he likens what should be likened. So this is a good simile as far as Dogen is concerned. Snowy mountains and nirvana should be likened because they are experienced directly and are straightforward. made me stop in my tracks. Snowy mountains and nirvana should be likened because they are experienced directly and are straightforward. To grasp what snowy mountains are is to liken them to snow-capped mountains. To grasp great nirvana is to liken it to great nirvana. And the interesting thing that comes up for me right away with that is, in certainly my own experience of looking at mountains, you can be in no doubt what you're looking at. If you've been to mountains, you know what I'm getting at. They always over-deliver. Now, if you have an image of a mountain, even one you know quite well, and you go to see it, it's always more than the image you've got in your head. It's more massive. It's more. It can be more beautiful. It can also be more terrifying. It can be both. And it's got a quality of. We could say eternity about it. We're sophisticated people, and we know there's no eternity. We know that mountains are brought together by tectonic plates, and they rise up, and then they get worn down, and then they're gone again. We know that. But when you see a mountain, when you're confronted with a mountain, there's something about it which is challenging to the fact that we are here for 70 years and 10, or whatever it is, and they've been there, standing there, for millennia. And it's a challenge to us. And they're also impersonal. There's nothing in our relationship with a mountain that feels particularly like it's personal. You know what I mean? It's something which is there in spite of us. I used to think they were more real than me, and then I got a bit more sophisticated and thought that's a bit silly. How can I say something's more real than me? If I can imagine something that's more real than me, then it's still me that's imagining it. But you know what I mean? It starts to make us feel undermined. It starts to make us feel undermined, and we start to want to question what we're looking at. And another aspect of them is that they're like barriers. They've always been with us in history, and sometimes we've cursed them and sometimes we've loved them. These days we tend to love them. We want to go and climb them, and we want to get fantastic picture postcard images of them, and their holiday destinations, their sports destinations. We have a real loving relationship with our mountains these days. But in the past they were seen as barriers, and that could be good and bad, because barriers can keep things that you don't want near you away. So they're very safe. If people want to invade your country and they've got to cross a mountain range, that's a bit of a disincentive. But they're also very limiting. The ancient Indian idea of the ideal landscape, the ideal place to be, was a plain. And I think, I'm not sure about this, but I think, as I reflect on plains, that the advantage of that is that they're boundless. If you stand in the middle of Norfolk and all you can see is a circular horizon around you, there's a sense of real expansiveness. You've got a lot of sky. You've got huge views in all directions, and they're unobstructed. So there's a sense in which you could see a plain as being a bit like that sense of pure awareness. Like that sense of boundedness. And you'd imagine, in that sense, then why isn't the Buddha saying that a plain may be likened to nirvana? Why is he saying mountains? And that throws up the interesting question, so what then are these mountains? And what are we saying about what they represent? And Dogen played a lot with that. And he said he used two examples. He said, first of all, he used Master Enyo, and he said, Master Nanyo Echu said, fences, walls, tiles and pebbles are the mind of eternal Buddhas. We should examine exactly where the present fences, walls, tiles and pebbles are, and we should ask what it is that is being realised like this. He says this in the same paragraph. as he's talking about mountains. So I think what he's saying there is we can look at mountains and we should ask ourselves exactly what they are. Now, what are these mountains? In real terms, in physical terms, you can see them, they're very obvious to us. But what about the mountains that we create for ourselves? You know, the barriers we put up around us, the defences we put up around us. What are those? Because this seems to be an invitation to look at those. Certainly, if Master Nanyo is saying that the mind of the eternal Buddhas is fences, walls, tiles, pebbles, he's talking about things that enclose us. Fences, walls, and tiles, of course, on the roof. We're putting tiles up. So we're talking about the things that start to enclose us. And we're being invited to look at those and see how those might be the great nirvana. And all sorts of interesting questions start to come out of that. If you think about the physicality of mountains, for example, what can that say to us about our experience of sitting? You know, mountains look very solid things, don't they? They look like there's something that's completely immovable, completely intractable. And they're used as images for Zazen itself, which we can talk about. People say sit like a mountain. So the idea of a mountain is something immovable, so some obstacle which can't be got beyond. And the physical nature of mountains gives you that impression. But then, I remember when I was, I must have been about 3 or 4, we lived in Scotland, and we used to have holidays where we'd go. We had a Ford Anglia, for those of you who are old enough to remember Ford Anglias. We'd used to drive around. My dad would drive us around Scotland, and we'd just explore. And I've got this memory, and I think it's not something I've recently recollected. It's something that's there for a long time, where we'd sit in these very deep glens in the car, and I'd be looking from the back seat up at the tops of the hills, and my eye was always sort of drawn up towards the horizon. So you could see blue sky, and then you could see these big green walls all around us, and then they'd have mountain streams cutting down through them. And because they're tumbling over waterfalls, they look white, because there's a lot of mountain stream breakwater in them. So they look white. So you see these kind of streaks like milk down the hillside. Except that because of the distance, because it was how far I was away from them, they all look frozen. They all look completely still. And so I'd be looking up at these waterfalls, and they just looked like they weren't moving. And I remember being quite spellbound by that and thinking, gosh, this is solid. And I had to ask my mum, why do those rivers look like they're solid? Because I knew they were streams, I knew what they were, but why did they look so solid? And she'd say, it's the distance and da-da-da-da. But I mean, the point is that we look at things and they look really solid. They look really like they are a huge obstacle to us. We can't get past them. We can't see a way through them. But when we get up close to them, we see them moving. If I'd walked up to those waterfalls, I'd have seen the movement in them. And if you think about that in terms of your practice, things that can seem really, really solid, really, really intractable, really, really difficult, I've got no way through this. When you actually just approach them, get into them, breathe into them, engage with them, they start to melt. They start to look different. They start to mutate. And then possibilities start to emerge from them. So in this way, we can sort of see how landscape starts to tell us things about our inner lives. And then we can sort of think about things in terms of the way in which what we think is solid is not really quite so solid. We have the perception of our world as being something very fixed and very substantial. And we know intellectually that's not so. Things are made up of the composite. But experientially we can see it as well. There's a fantastic poem by Nan Shepherd which I think sums it up beautifully. And, she's looking at a mountain and seeing the way in which it's ephemeral. And this huge, great chunk of Cairngorm granite can seem ephemeral. And if it seems ephemeral to our perception, then, in terms of our life, in terms of the way we experience our world, it's ephemeral. So this is called the hill.
Tony, what does ephemeral mean?
Fleeting. Illusory.
Thank you.
Not quite what it seems. So this is called the hill. So it may be So it may be a hill was there, blue, tremulous, afar. I looked and thought the gleam was air, and thought the morning star might tremble thus, and thus resolve its fire in common light, content while world and sun revolve to vanish from the sight. So hard it was that morn to tell if earth or heaven I saw. I knew not how on earth to dwell, nor how from heaven withdraw. For vanishing with my thought and stealing back to view, earth mingled so with heaven, they wrought one universe from two. So you can see, she's playing with this idea of form and emptiness, and we see the world as being very solid. And then we sort of think, yeah, but it's all impermanent. But you can experience it that way. You just by engaging with the world around us and not seeing it the way we expect it to be, not seeing it with the mind that wants to, first of all, make a gap between the subject, me, and that, and then think it all through. Go and look at it with all my presuppositions. That's kind of what we do. That's kind of what we're encouraged to do in life. Even tourism does that to us. Don't have a great time in the Cairngorms or wherever. And you go up there with all your expectations all loaded up. You're going to have a great time. But when you just go and look and just allow the mind to be lucid and open, then perception starts to look different. And this is kind of what Zazen is, I think, all about. It's about opening out and softening our gaze and then seeing the world, not with a judgmental mind, not with the mind of all these pebbles, fences, stones, whatever, all these metaphors you can use to describe the way in which we create categories and make judgments about things. Just putting all that to one side and just looking. Then things start to look very different. And why is that less real? We make all these kind of judgments about things. Oh, well, of course, there really is a mountain over there, and if it looks like it's part of the sky, then that's just an illusion. That's just a mirage. Well, who says so? And if our experience of that moment is that the mountain is shimmering in the blue of the sky, and then it disappears altogether in the light, why is that less real than the scientific explanation for what a mountain is? And that's our experience. It's the way we see our life. And there are a few kahan that go into this, and we haven't got time to talk about many of them. But there's a famous one, a monk called Sozan Honjaku. 1,000 mountains are covered with snow. Why is one peak not white? It's challenging us to look at these sorts of questions. And when we start to do that, we start to see the way in which our world is not static. It's so easy to think of our world as being static, and we're impermanent, because I'm getting older. I started as a child and now I'm getting older. I can get quite a strong sense that I'm impermanent. I'm not as healthy as I once was. My eyesight's not as good as it once was. That's all very clear to me. But the world is not static. The world is dynamic too. And it moves with us, and it changes with us. And it affects us, and we affect it mutually. So when we start to think in those sorts of ways, we get a very different kind of experience. And in the Mountains and Rivers Sutra, Dogen Zenji talks about the green mountains constantly walking. And he says it's obvious that the green mountains walk. And to a common sense perspective, that makes no sense whatsoever. But if you allow yourself just to engage in the landscape, then it does start to make sense. And this kind of thing is the sort of thing that I think Nan Shepherd was really, really good at doing. And she says, for example, things like, if you can just allow yourself to be completely immersed in your landscape, then details are no longer part of a grouping in a picture in which I am the focal point. So this is Zazen, I think. The focal point is everywhere. Nothing has reference to me, the looker. And then she says, this is how the earth must see itself. Which is really nice, and echoes something that Dogen said. I can find it again. He was talking about Bodhidharma, and he said, Bodhidharma said, the mind in every instant is like trees and stones, which is making a similar sort of point. What is described here, he said, is the mind as it is. It is the mind as the whole earth. So there's a way in which we can look at our world which is not the perspective of the looker looking at it, looking out at it, but the whole world looking at the whole world. And there are lots of different metaphors that get used to try to describe what this is like, and none of them really grab it. And there's a lot of jargon in it. But when we just sit and we allow our mind to go into neutral, then we begin to get a sense of it. And again, this metaphor of the mountain crops up in that context, because in the Zazen Shingi, Dogen Zenzi talks about sitting as being sitting like a still mountain. And if we can do that, if we can allow the body to be still, and we can use the breath to just ground us in the instant, then we don't need to worry what the mind's doing. You just leave it. If it wants to have a few thoughts and a few fantasies, that's fine. Let it. Because we're still here. We're still in this place, in this posture. And then whatever's happening around us is just happening. And there doesn't need to be somebody commenting on it all the time. It's happening anyway. There was a sparrowhawk out there. I know it's a sparrowhawk because Andy told me it was. But there's a sparrowhawk out there earlier on. It didn't need our help. It was just happy singing. And we don't need to be sitting there saying, I am Tony sitting here hearing that sparrowhawk, for that sparrowhawk to be singing. It's singing.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
When I look out the window, when I look at nature, it just shows me time and time again that everything's slowly passing. That we are, and so is everything around us. And nature, like when I look outside at the bird feeders and I look at the little birds, they show me time and time again that everything is just on the move.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. In The Living Mountain, Nan Shepherd talks about walking through landscape, saying, remarking that she was not happy with the word, but she said it bristles. It kind of comes in and envelops. And Macfarlane, in his commentary on it, said that landscape scapes. It is dynamic and commotion causing. It sculpts and shapes us, not only in the course of our lives, but also instant by instant, incident by incident. So everything around us is in constant change, but it's constantly influencing and sculpting us as well. Which is an interesting idea. And it says something about the way in which we can nurture our relationship with our world and appreciate it for what it is. So I started off saying how much I really liked this building and how much I really appreciated the 20 years we spent coming here and sitting together. It's imbibed with something, and we can appreciate it. And we are scaping, if you want to use that expression, with the barn. The barn is scaping us, sculpting us. And I like that sense of that interconnectedness. It feels to me as if it brings us to a point of real concrete experience. It's not highfalutin. It's not about weird and wonderful ideas or even scientific theories. It's about how we experience our lives right now. So, when you come back to this thing about mountains and, where are the mountains and what are these mountains? Then, I think if I was trying to think, well, how would I describe nirvana? And I think I would probably plumb for something like, it's to be awake. Just to be awake, just to appreciate what's here. So, mountains are mountains. Nobody can deny mountains are mountains. Mountains are being mountains, and so my job is to be me. And Nirvana's job is to be that connection. Mountains. And then, what mountains? Well, there aren't any mountains here, there's a barn. But is that not mountains? There's a great koan in the Blue Cliff record where a monk asks Hakujo, what is the special thing? And Hakujo says, sitting alone on the peak of great valour. So, okay, we can't stay on top of some really high mountain. I went up Mont Blanc once and it was minus 17 up there. You wouldn't stay there for very long. You can't stay in these places for very long. But where is the peak of great valour? And that's a question we can ask about ourselves. And we want to find that liberating experience, that moment of great expansiveness. We want to find that way of making our everyday life workable. We want to find that way of really engaging with our lives, really finding ease in our lives. So the question then is, so where is that peak of great valour? And that's the thing we have to work with. Jamie, you were going to say something?
No, I wasn't.
I had a clever finish for this, but I think I've lost it now. But, so Dogen says somewhere in the Fascal on the Hojo no Joshin, what does this all come down to? If we see the mind as tiles, pebbles, walls, fences, or if we see it as great mountains, what's it come down to? And he said breakfast and lunch.
Yeah.
Breakfast and lunch. So where is the peak of great valour? So we do service, and then a great lunch made by Steph and Jenny. And do we appreciate that? Do we see the way in which it connects with us and we connect with it?